Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update extra video, giving you extra information and tidbits to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. And where should we turn to first? Well, of course, the news that Vladimir Putin, the president of the Russian Federation, has been issued an arrest warrant by the International Criminal Court for war crimes, particularly focusing on the illegal deportation of children from Ukraine to Russia. This is the illegal deportation of children is one of the 11 crimes, I guess, that constitute grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions and are applicable only to the international international armed conflict. I'm drawing from my article that I wrote in Only Sky last night. Just to give you the information of this is just a basic news article. Panel of judges deciding to make the warrants public, so they could have kept the secret, agreed that there were reasonable grounds to believe that both he and Maria Alexeyevna Lvova-Belova, the Russian Children's Rights Commissioner, I mean, incredibly ironic. That's not strong enough word? Hypocritical, just insulting that she's a Russian Children's Rights Commissioner and has overseen war crimes against children. It's just terrible. And they have, both those two had individual criminal responsibility for the unlawful deportation of Ukrainian children. Other I think it appears to me that the deportation of children is the thing that the ICC and people generating the evidence for war crimes have the most, I guess, easily accessible information and information that's easier to get now for such a war crime. So if you're looking at things like butcher, it's very time-consuming, meticulous sort of work you've got to do to piece together what's happened. It's kind of forensic science is going on and all this other stuff. Whereas with this, in this case, like the Russians have paraded these children on TV. They've talked about this very openly. There is a lot of evidence that's out there. We've got the one report recently has said that 6,000 children have been deported in this way. The Ukrainians say that it's more like well over 16,000, so it's a far greater problem than the very conservative report has reportedly concluded. This Lvova Belova she had previously complained that some of the children removed from the city of Mariupol, quote, spoke badly about Putin, said awful things, and sang the Ukrainian anthem. She has adopted a 15-year-old boy from Mariupol, reportedly, telling Putin on television, "Thanks to you, now I know what it's like to be a mum of a Donbass child." So she's actually directly involved in this by kind of adopting a child that has been illegally deported out of Ukraine. It's absolutely shocking. Moscow's obviously this is going to happen. They've declared the warrants outrageous. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova has stated on Telegram that the decisions of the International Criminal Court have no meaning for our country, including from a legal point of view. Russia is not a party to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court and bears no obligations under it. It's nonetheless, as according to the Yale Humanitarian Research Lab report that found that at least 6,000 have been deported. Incidents identified by my office, said the ICC prosecutor Karim Khan, include the deportation of at least hundreds of children taken from orphanages and children's care homes. Russia's made no secret of this. So recently we saw in the parade,
we have an update.
I don't know if parade's the right word. The big song and dance at the anniversary of the war that took place in a stadium in Moscow, where they shipped in a load of people, students, whatnot, and forced them to take part in this. As far as being in the crowd's concerned, so you had a packed stadium with people flying Russian flags. It was all rather staged, but they paraded these children around. During this event, and it was pretty despicable. As this CNN report says, children from Mariupol used in Kremlin's pro-war rally.
Trying to turn them into Russian kids, which they call a humanitarian gesture. Tonight, we're getting new details about some video we saw from a rally celebrating what Russia calls Defense of the Fatherland Day. The rally was last week, At the event, there was a 13-year-old girl, Anna, nicknamed Anya, that's her, from Mariupol, and on this day, she was made to read apparently scripted words of thanks to a Russian soldier.
Thank you, Uncle Yura, for saving me, my sister, and hundreds of thousands of children in Mariupol. I forget a little.
Anya, don't be shy. Go hug Uncle Yuri. Everyone give a
You don't know what's gone on with this girl. You don't know whether she's got some kind of Stockholm syndrome, whether they've just showered her with kindness and she actually feels genuinely good about her life coming out of that. It's really difficult stuff, this.
hug. Look, it's the man who saved you all.
Not for nothing, his call sign is Angel.
Well, tonight we know more about Anna and her story. CNN's Melissa Bell did some of the reporting for us. She joins us now from Kyiv. So, what have you learned?
Well, that this child, Anderson, is several times over a victim of this war, not only because, of course, she lived through the siege of Mariupol that went on, remember, for 3 long months, sheltering in basements with her mother, brother, and sister as the city was pounded by heavy artillery. She then lost her mother, a single mother of 3 who'd done her best to raise her so far in fairly difficult conditions, as we understand. As she left the basement one day to go out, she was killed. Anya's been mourning her ever since online with her social media. We're able to see that, but also because, of course, she was then taken from Mariupol to Moscow for this very public display. Not just the many hundreds of thousands who were there, Anderson, but of course, everyone who saw it aired across Russia, but also in Ukraine. And what we understand since is that this child's become abused online by people angry at what they saw, threatening to hang her should they manage to retake Mariupol from the Russians. So it's an extraordinary story of a child completely unprotected and open to very public abuse ever since that extraordinary spectacle, Anderson.
Were you able to speak with?
So you got this girl that's being used as a public pawn that's inciting kind of a vicious, vociferous reaction from all sides. And you don't know what kind of brainwashing is taking place with her. But anyway, like this is all just horrible. Like the whole thing's horrible. But of course, she's one of arguably over 10,000 children who have been taken, put through some through filtration camps, some through adopted out to families, so on and so forth. It's just a whole catalogue of some pretty egregious stuff that's taken place, and it seems that this is the, if you like, the easiest way into pinning war crimes on Putin. It's not a case of pinning. I mean, this is what he's done. It's like holding him to account. But this is one of the most obvious crimes that he's done with the most obvious evidence. Karim Khan continues. My office alleges that these acts, amongst others, demonstrate an intention to permanently remove these children from their own country. We must ensure that those responsible for alleged crimes are held accountable and that children are returned to their families and communities. We cannot allow children to be treated as if they are the spoils of war. This type of crime doesn't need one to be a lawyer. One needs to be a human being to know how egregious it is. So the ICC doesn't have the power of arrest itself. It has jurisdiction over 123 countries, and there are other countries this map here, this is taken from Wikipedia, have the green countries in green are state parties, parties to the Statute of Rome. A signatory that has not been ratified are in yellow. State party that's subsequently withdrawn its membership in purple, so it looks like the Philippines there. Signatory that subsequently withdrew its signature, so withdrew its membership and withdrew its signature. I'm not sure the difference there, but you've got Russia and the US. That's very interesting. Partly because I don't think they want to be done. If they sign up to this, then it allows them to be held to account. So when they're in war, and it's a bit like why they're thinking twice, the US are thinking twice about presenting evidence, because they think in such cases as this, because they think actually then it sets a precedent and they could be up for war crimes going forward. Yeah, so I can imagine there's some very careful maneuvering going on here, but nonetheless, you have a lot of countries around the world where if they're serious about wanting to stamp out war crimes, and if Putin arrives there, then they are obliged to arrest him. And that also includes, as I mentioned this morning, Brazil and South Africa, who are members of the BRICS group. Brazil, Brazil, India, China, South Africa, and Russia. So if Putin steps into these countries, then they are obliged to arrest him and then get into The Hague. But of course, they're also in a group that's supposed to be forging a close-knit community of nations that are standing up to the hegemony of the US. Now, previously, 2015, South Africa didn't arrest Omar al-Bashir, who was in South Africa. You can argue that Putin would be far more controversial than that still. So it's an interesting question as to whether he would actually be arrested if he set foot into any one of these or every one of these 123 countries. Which countries would arrest him? I don't know. But it's still a problem. It presents a problem for him geopolitically, for him, carrying out his duties as the head of state for Russia, and going to meetings around the G20 and so on and so forth. Such meetings involving the powerful nations of the world, is he able to turn up? And what does this also say to his supporters? The people in the threads below, pro-Kremlin voices that I have in my threads. He's being had for how do you square the circle here? He's being had up for war crimes. Again, I said this the other day, is how do you answer to this video footage of looting, of Russian soldiers looting Ukrainian houses? And again, it's watching the mental gymnastics that has to take place, the kind of the contortions, the gerrymandering of brain states that have to take place in order for pro-Kremlin voices to maintain their belief that Putin is right and the Russians are right and they have the moral high ground. Well, actually, you've got a panel of judges. These are experts in the field. It's not no one. Like someone in my thread said, this clown circus is the ICC. How is it a clown circus? Like, on what right do you have to say that? These are people that are fighting for international justice so that war crimes don't take place. How would you like it if your family were raped and then decapitated in a war zone? Would you not like some kind of justice for that, if that was systemically taking place as a result of aggression of some state player? Would you not want the ICC to say, do you know what, that terrible thing that's happened to your family, we're going to hold those people that did that to account? How dare you call that a clown circus without any kind of justification? And when I call you out on that, saying, oh, you're being a bit sensitive. No, I'm not. You're being a douche. Just don't be a moral monster. Right, so either you just forget the rule of law and you just say, do you know what, international criminal courts for war crimes are just not. It's just not my thing. Like, fair enough, you can say that, but just not your thing means that you have no moral fiber. Right? If you're a decent human being and you want justice in the world, then organizations like this are fighting for justice. I mean, that's the entire reason for their existence, right? To get justice. If you're interested in justice, then these organizations are super important. If you're not interested in justice, I'm not interested in speaking to you, really, because you're operating on a completely different moral mapping system to how I operate. It just annoys me. So you can try and justify this however you like, but the end result is it's now fairly obvious that Putin is a war criminal. Are you on the right side? I think I know the answer. You're not. Going on to other things now. This is. I showed this video yesterday, and there was. It seems incontrovertibly true to me that Russian jet fighters caused a Reaper drone to fall into the Black Sea, and that they were doing passes and covering it in fuel. That much is true. Whether a jet clipped the Reaper is as yet unknown. And I showed you this footage. This was on the news. This bit of footage was on the Channel 4 news in the UK. And they talked about how the propeller at the end showed that the Russian plane had hit it. But at the time, I was like, that doesn't quite make sense. And I'll explain why in a second. And then someone else pointed out an even more obvious issue. But anyway, I'm going to play this to you first, just to remind you what happened. So we have the idea was that this showed Russian jets flying very close to the Reaper drone, trying to cover it in fuel for some reason, maybe to cover up its cameras, maybe to ruin its navigation, maybe to, I don't know, whatever. That was the intention with that. And then an even closer one here. Now, this was very close. Now, my summary there, right, is that you probably had that plane hitting the drone and it going into a tailspin, and that was what was recorded. That's what was claimed by the US. And I think that's probably correct. You have the camera cutting out as that passed over, right? So actually, I think that's what's happened. But and this was actually where many of the initial videos ended. But then you started seeing the video lengthened, and this is what was used on some of the news pieces. And this is a video shared with you yesterday. But I'm actually going to call this video out, as in not the entire video, but I'm going to call the end out. As you can see here, this is the end of the video, right? And then it starts again. So that is the end of the video as it originally was. And then I showed you this video yesterday. This is a slightly longer video that goes through it all until you get to this part. And as you can see, when the camera goes, there's still another 10 seconds left. So then we have this part. Now, that last bit at the end, there are two things. First of all, how would you have, if the camera had been cut off, right? The camera's out because one presumes the drone was hit. The camera's out. How do you then have later footage of the camera back on and a damaged propeller? So the claim from the Channel 4 News, which is a good news source in the UK. I really like Channel 4 News. Now, the reporter said, as you can see, this propeller is damaged, and this caused it to go into a tailspin. Well, it's damaged, yes, but it's not gone into a tailspin here. So, and also, my issue was, as I said, why is the video feed come back on? But someone else pointed out rather obviously, and actually now I've looked into it, there's a number of people saying this online, is that actually oh goodness, I'm so rubbish with my fingers. Sorry, so some people pointed out that on the propellers here, there are two yellow stripes on each of the propellers. Two obvious yellow stripes. Yet when you go to the end section, none of the propellers have yellow stripes. Now, the sun is in a different direction, which is also an interesting point, and they are now in shade. But it appears to me that this end part is spliced on to the original video. And we can see someone pointing that out there. Two yellow stripes, no yellow stripes. Could it be in the dark that you can't see it? The sun is definitely in a different direction now. I personally think that they spliced on that end part to kind of try and show that it was clipped. But I don't think you needed to do that. The original ones, as you can see here, were a shorter 34-second video. This is what happened, and then it cuts out, and then that's the end, and the drone ends up in the water. So I think that someone in the US has edited this video at the end and added on an extra bit to try and like prove, if you like, that the propeller was damaged. I don't think you needed to do that, and I don't think it's helpful when you have when you do stuff like this, if indeed that's what's happened. But it seems to me those two bits of evidence, there are no stripes on the propellers, and the video feed was already cut out. How can it then suddenly come back on and it's flying with a damaged propeller and not in a tailspin, even though you say that it's a tailspin the damaged propeller caused a tailspin. So those things, just that last section of that video, it didn't happen. But the whole event did happen, if you see what I mean. Right, now I'm going to get onto. I spoke to you at length about the morality involved and the issues involved in a commander going to the papers or being approached by the papers and fulfilling an interview and then going on social media to slag off command and to talk about things in an unauthorized way. And then he was then demoted, and some people saying that he shouldn't have been demoted because he was saying the right things and we need to change the higher up command, and including people like Zelensky, rather than crap on these people when they're just speaking truth in these difficult times. But I was talking about how you just can't do that in war, particularly in war, in the armed forces. You can't even do that at your own job. If you went to a newspaper and slagged off to your bosses and your business or whatever, your company in the newspapers or on social media, then you're going to be out of a job within a couple of days. And that's pretty obvious. You do that in the army, you can expect even worse. And in wartime in the army, big problems. Anyway, the newspaper you went to was the Washington Post, and actually, I think this is the same guy that was featured in the Kiev Independent initially, and I think the Kiev Independent released an article that I dipped into, and I was telling you about some people in Bakhmut who weren't happy and who were fighting Solidar and then were drafted out, and I think the Washington Post then approached those people after the Kiev Independent article. So then they wrote this article, and anyway, so this is a negative view on what's going on along the front line, perhaps, but certainly in Bakhmut. This is the negative idea, and I think it's worth sharing that with you so you can try and make up your mind as to how much of this is representative, and whether you can also think about whether it is the right thing for him to do this. Even though he got demoted, so on and so forth. Ukraine short of skilled troops and munitions as losses and pessimism grow. Is this problematic? Is it spreading information that breeds low morale? The question for me is it right for me to spread this if I want Ukraine to win? How is that truth versus utility tension that I talked about in my last video? But I'm going to talk about this with you. US and European officials have estimated that as many as 120,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed or wounded since the start of Russia's invasion early last year, compared with about 200,000 on the Russian side, which has a much larger military and roughly triple the population from which to draw conscripts. Ukraine keeps its running casualty numbers secret, even from its staunchest Western supporters. Statistics aside, an influx of inexperienced draftees brought in to plug the losses has changed the profile of the Ukrainian force, which is also suffering from basic shortages of ammunition, including artillery shells and mortar bombs, according to military personnel in the field. So this is about force quality. When you take out your inexperienced good troops who have died or wounded, and you replace them with the inexperienced troops with very, very poor training in comparison, then your force quality is shifting in the wrong direction. Quote, the most valuable thing in war is combat experience, said a battalion commander of the 46th Air Assault Brigade, who is being identified only by his call sign Kupol. However, they also have a picture of him down here, and we'll come to this later. In keeping with Ukrainian military protocol, a soldier who has survived 6 months of combat and a soldier who came from a firing range are two different soldiers. It's heaven and earth. And there are only a few soldiers with combat experience, Kupol added. Unfortunately, they are all already dead or wounded. The situation on the battlefield may not reflect a full picture of Ukraine's forces, because Kiev is training troops for the coming counteroffensive separately and deliberately holding them back from the current fighting, including the defense of Bakhmut, a US official said, speaking on the condition of anonymity. To be candid, it goes on, and I'm just picking out a few bits here. One senior Ukrainian government official who spoke on a condition of anonymity, to be candid, called the number of tanks promised by the West a symbolic amount. Others privately voiced pessimism that promised supplies would even reach the battlefield in time. Of course, they always want more, and my opinion is actually that is correct. I think we should just be like, if I was in charge of the UK Armed Forces, I'd be like, well, we're not going to go to war directly ourselves. No one's going to invade Britain, and there's Article 5 of NATO. So give all of our challenges to Ukraine. Just give all our challenges and let's get some new tanks. Or let's get building some Challenger 3s directly from scratch, and let's get our defense industry stimulated with doing that. But just give all our tanks. I mean, that's me. So I would agree that actually is kind of a symbolic amount, or getting away with giving the kind of the minimum. There's certain countries like Poland are doing a really good job of giving a lot more. If you have more resources, you more actively attack, the senior official said. If you have fewer resources, you defend more. We're going to defend. That's why, if you ask me personally, I don't believe in a big counteroffensive for us. I'd like to believe in it, but I'm looking at the resources and asking, with what? Maybe we'll have some localized breakthroughs. We don't have the people or weapons, the senior official added. And you know the ratio. When you're on the offensive, you lose twice or 3 times as many people. We can't afford to lose that many people. So then it goes on to say, this is the less optimistic view of things, as you can see, than what many of the Ukrainian top commanders are saying. And it then starts talking about Syrsky, who's in charge of Bakhmut. Our president inspires us to win, said Syrsky in interview. Generally, we all think the same, and we understand that it's for us. It is, of course, necessary to win by the end of the year, and it is real. It is real if we are given all the help which we have been promised by our partners. But on the front line, however, it says the mood is dark. So 2 different situations here. Kupol, who consented, arguably, according to this article, Kupol, who consented to having his photograph taken and said he understood he could face personal blowback for giving a frank assessment, described going to battle with newly drafted soldiers who have never thrown a grenade, who readily abandoned their positions under fire, and who lacked confidence in handling firearms. So this is the kind of stuff that, as a pro-Ukrainian, you don't want to hear. Like, this is negative stuff that makes you think, things aren't as good as I was led to believe, and it's not all rosy on the front line. Yes, it's not all rosy on the front line. I mean, you go and look at All Quiet on the Western Front, and those German soldiers, fresh off the training ground, sent to the front, really green, don't have the training or expertise, combat experience, and how terrible it is not only for them but also their fellow soldiers who are having to rely on them, and these guys don't have the skill sets yet. You argue that that comes with time. Learning on the job, right? But these aren't new problems, and both sides will be experiencing this. And the question is, do Ukraine have this worse than the Russians? So it might be bad for Ukraine, but if it's not as bad as it is for Russia, they still have a competitive advantage. There's still an asymmetry there. After a year of war, Kupol, a lieutenant colonel, said his battalion is unrecognizable. And I think these figures are pretty much not accurate, and I'll explain why in a second. Of about 500 soldiers, roughly 100 were killed in action and another 400 wounded. So basically, Kupol's saying that of 500 soldiers, literally 100% of them were killed or wounded. And of course, he's not killed or wounded, so there's definitely some hyperbole going on, I think, here. But what he's saying is, of 500 soldiers, it was bad, and I would have no problem with agreeing with that. He says, leading to a complete turnover. Kupol said he was a sole military professional in the battalion, and he described the struggle of leading a unit composed entirely of inexperienced troops. So he's basically saying that, that everyone apart from him in that battalion were new, inexperienced troops. I get 100 new soldiers, Kupol said. They don't give me any time to prepare them. They say, take them into battle. They just drop everything and run. That's it. Do you understand why? Because the soldier doesn't shoot. I ask him why, and he says, I'm afraid of the sound of a shot. And for some reason, he was never thrown a grenade. We need NATO instructors in all our training centers, and our instructors need to be sent over there into the trenches because they failed in their task. He described severe ammunition shortages, including a lack of simple mortar bombs and grenades for US-made Mk-19s. Ukraine has also faced an acute shortage of artillery shells, which Washington and its allies have scrambled to address. Kupol said Kyiv needed to focus on better preparing new troops in a systematic way. Quote, it's like all we do is give interviews and tell people that we've already won just a little bit further away, 2 weeks, and we'll win, he said. Some of the less experienced troops serving at his position with the 36th Marine Brigade in the Donetsk region, quote, are afraid to leave the trenches, he said. Shelling is so intense at times, he said that one soldier will have a panic attack and then others catch it. The first time he saw fellow soldiers very shaken, Dmytro said he tried to talk them through the reality of the risks. The next time, he said, they just ran from the position. I don't blame them. He said they were so confused, and this is Dmytro and other soldiers in Kupol. The challenges stem from steep losses. General Valery Zaluzhny, Ukraine's commander-in-chief, said in August that nearly 9,000 of his soldiers had died In December, Mikhailo Podolyak, an advisor to Zelensky, said the number was up to 13,000. But Western officials have given higher estimates. In any case, the Ukrainian figures excluded the far larger number of wounded who are no longer able to fight. A German official, speaking on the condition of anonymity to be candid, said that Berlin estimates Ukrainian casualties, including dead and wounded, to be as high as 120,000. They don't share the information with us because they don't trust us, the official said. I love that statement because it's like, here I am talking to a newspaper. They don't seem to share the information with us. They don't trust us. They think that we're going to share the information with a newspaper. He says sharing the information with a newspaper. It's just like, yeah, that's probably why they're not telling you. Meanwhile, a Russian offensive has been building since early January. According to Syrsky Budanov, Ukraine's military intelligence chief, told the Post last month that Russia has had more than 325,000 soldiers in Ukraine, and another 150,000 mobilized troops could soon join the fight. Ukrainian soldiers report being outnumbered and having less ammunition. The question is whether Ukraine's relative advantage is sufficient to attain their objectives and whether those advantages can be sustained, said Michael Kaufman, someone who I've dipped into before, not personally, that's weird, a military analyst at Virginia-based CNA. That depends not just on them, but also on the West. He continues, so, despite reports of untrained mobilized Russian fighters being thrown into battle, Syrsky said those now arriving are well prepared. We have to live and fight in all these realities, he said. Of course, it's problematic for us. It forces us to be more precise in our firing, more detailed in our reconnaissance, more careful in choosing our positions, and more detailed in organizing the interaction between the units. There is no other way. So, he's saying that, yeah, if we have fewer if we had less ammunition and fewer troops and fewer drones, then we have to use them far more efficiently. Ukraine has lost many of its junior officers, the piece continues, who received US training over the past 9 years, eroding a core of leaders who helped distinguish the Ukrainians from their Russian enemies at the start of the invasion, the Ukrainian official said. Now, the official said, these forces must be replaced. A lot of them are killed. Now, before I go on to that, it's interesting. So The Economist has just released a piece that says Ukraine's army must shed its Soviet legacy, says a military expert. And Shashank Joshi, who also writes for The Economist, said one of the most interesting pieces on Ukraine I've read for a while. Based on recent fieldwork, it argues that rigid, solid Soviet thinking is holding back Ukraine's armed forces, with micromanaging commanders stifling junior initiative. This is essentially two Soviet militaries fighting one another, lamented the official. This is precisely what we have heard from senior Western military officials with close involvement in advising Ukraine, certainly not armchair generals. This doesn't mean Ukraine can't be successful, but command and control of complex, large-scale operations remains a concern among Western officials who want the counteroffensive to go well. This is one focus of training efforts underway right now. This is, so going back to the Washington Post, there's the idea that those trained with the kind of NCO cadre approach, the doctrine, the NATO doctrine, many of those who've been trained over the last 8-9 years in that way of doing war have died. And now you're getting fresh, sort of inexperienced recruits in, and you've still got some of these old Soviet leaders in place. And there's a dynamic that is problematic. Then talks about what's going on to kind of like solve this problem. So just one battalion out of 650 people has completed the training in Germany so far. This is on the Combined Arms Initiative in Grafenwohr. Additional Ukrainian battalions will complete the training by the end of March. Britain has also been training Ukrainian recruits, including about 10,000 last year, with another 20,000 expected this year. And the EU, the European Union, has said it will train 30,000 Ukrainians this year. US officials said they expect Ukraine's offensive to start in late April or early May, and are acutely aware of the urgency of supplying Kyiv, because a drawn-out war could favour Russia, which has more people, money, and weapons manufacturing. All of that presents a pretty negative picture. But again, I must say that it is still a case of, yes, that's not as rosy as we might have thought it was, but is it still better than Russia? So imagine you were doing these kind of newspaper articles, interviewing Russian commanders, and think of all those videos of the Russian troops we've seen complaining en masse, literally whole units complaining in one video camera like picture. Like all of us, we are all in solidarity that it is terrible, right? So imagine the Washington Post seeing what's going on with the Russian forces, the article would be 5 times as long and far more damning. My point is, and I'm not just trying to paint this in a positive light as possible. Like I am doing that, but it's not like I'm trying to do that. I'm actually evaluating this like objectively. Like my point is, and I've said this already, is that this is bad, but it's still not as bad as it is in Russia. And the Russian forces have been degraded, I think, at a higher rate and a greater rate more consistently than the Ukrainian forces. So what this article is saying is there's a false quality issue with the Ukrainians, and it is a problem, and it's been happening since the beginning of the war because they are having their most experienced and best fighters degraded. Yeah, this is true. However, it's happened to the Russians even more. Like we've had in time, like the naval infantry brigades, the VDV, no, those airborne brigades, but they've been attrited. The naval infantry brigades of Marines, the 40th, 155th NIB down in Vuhledar have been decimated and pretty much wiped out, reconstituted 3 times. And the point is, this is bad, but it's even worse for Russia. And as long as there's a continued even worse for Russia, that asymmetry is enough to eventually, well, you hope eventually to bring about Ukraine prevailing in this conflict. Ukraine have to keep that asymmetry going. So don't just look at this and think of all the negatives and only concentrate on the negatives. See it in the context of everything and go, that's bad, but as long as it's still really bad for the Russians, or a lot worse for the Russians, then that is a calculation we are willing to go with. And for example, Russia don't have things like this. So this is the UK Ministry of Defence showing how Ukrainian servicemen undergo training on a Challenger 2 main battle tank.
The aim of the course is really to give the Ukrainian crews the best amount of knowledge we can within the restricted amount of time we've got, noting that they need to get back to start fighting again. And it's designed to give them a firm foundation in how to fight the tank and how to live off the tank as well. We've done 4 separate courses, similar to that which we do in the UK, courses for the commander, the gunner, the driver and the operator. And at the end of the sort of the technical training, so learning which button does what and how to make the gun fire, we'll do a consolidation package which will allow them to work together as a crew for the first time, fire the tank on ranges, and then they'll be ready to go on to a bit more tactical training in the form of simulators, and then they'll return to the Ukraine to marry up with the vehicles that the British government is giving them.
And again, think of that asymmetry. Yeah, you're going to get newbie tankers coming on, but are they getting better equipment and better training than the Russians? Yes, they might not get enough. There's still going to be complaints. There is a massive shortage of ammunition and equipment. Yes, but if the allies of Ukraine can do their very best to try and close that gap, to produce enough artillery ammunition to give Ukraine what they need, then they are in a good position going forward. Now, to hold to this kind of negative approach to what's going on, this is a Tatragami opinion piece. Again, so for those seeking a deeper analysis, this message would hold importance. While the Ukrainian army has faced criticism, including my own, it's important to recognize that criticism alone can be counterproductive. My goal is to highlight issues that need attention without criticizing any particular political or military leader. To provide a better understanding, I will be quoting and using the analysis of Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Grant, a defense and reform expert who has provided advisory services to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. Key issues and takeaways from the assessment. We need clear ownership and responsibilities of every piece of ground on the front line and behind to avoid casualties due to a lack of boundary clarity. This requires every area to have a designated commander and all personnel entering that area to be under their command. Geographical boundaries must not constrain the unit's ability to maneuver and attack from the enemy from the sides or change positions. This is interesting, nothing I've thought about before, but there's talk, I have thought about it a little bit, because there was talk about this issue being a problem previously with Russia, where there was no like commander of the whole army at the beginning of the whole campaign. You had different military groups in different areas of Ukraine, but no one person kind of tying it all together. Now that seems to have changed. But then in these different areas, there needs to be a strict control of those areas. With Russia, you had like DPR, LNR, LPR, Wagner, Russian military, but then you had different military districts operating. You had the VDV, the airborne, the Marines, all these kind of units working in their own command structures, trying to work together and failing to work together. So with Ukraine, he's saying like, if you're in a certain area, you are under that control, under the control of that person, under the control of this kind of leadership hierarchy, and there needs to be a clear delineation on a map of who is controlling what. And it sounds obvious, but when you've got this dynamic war going on and different units doing different things, there may be, you might have a unit coming over and doing something in your area. Like, who's in charge of them? How come they're over there? What's going on? Numerous independent units operate in opposition to each other, which is kind of what I was saying. This creates pockets of units with varying levels of training and equipment, resulting in different divisions of quality. The absence of a unified military concept leads to organizational arrogance, with certain units perceived as superior and treated accordingly. A new policy should ensure all personnel are trained, equipped, and commanded to the same basic quality. Special forces are supposed to be, and were trained by the US to be, the deep attack organization working behind the lines to disrupt and destroy. Instead, they're often being used as light infantry, wasting years of expensive US training. This is indeed the problem that has also happened with the Russians. So the VDV there's been accusations that they've been used as your basic grunts on the front line in ways that they shouldn't be used. And this is a claim here for the special forces. Policy should be that those commanders who can get results with limited loss of troops must be promoted to more serious command roles. If you're shown to succeed, recognize that success. Effective battle management requires senior commanders to delegate and listen to the concerns of junior commanders who are leading the fight, rather than trying to second guess them or impose orders that do not fit with how the battle commander sees the problem. Again, this is kind of the NCOs giving them more power, enfranchising them. This is the NATO doctrine, and this is kind of moving away from the Soviet top-down command. What I say goes no matter what. Commanders are responsible for training their troops at all levels and for the quality of the training. Those who do not have the knowledge and ability to conduct training of subordinates should not be commanders. Law 8271, signed recently, increases the responsibility of servicemen found guilty of refusing to carry out orders. The law resembles Soviet-era legislation and may demand actions leading to death. It may raise questions about trust in Ukrainian society. So it's like, why have we made this rule that seems to be going back to Soviet-era command structures? To counter evolving tactics used by Russia and Wagner, troops require resources such as drones, radios and internet, night sights, 60mm mortars, grenades and grenade launchers for platoons, a full 81 82mm mortar company for each battalion, short-range missiles, AFAKs, uniform and safety equipment for every soldier. It is essential to prioritize discussions about these enablers in Ramstein meetings, not just larger equipment. Something I mentioned the other day, which is that quite often it's all about how many tanks and how many IFVs are being given, and should we get these MiGs? Can we get these MiGs? But hang on, you also need scopes and first aid kits and grenade launchers and grenades for grenade launchers, etc., etc., etc. You need all of this stuff in order to enable the success for the Ukrainians. Policy changes are necessary to modernize the military system, which still relies on outdated Soviet-style rules and regulations. For example, drones purchased abroad need a signature for release from MOD to the unit that purchased them. That was not done. This was not done for 4 weeks. This delay means that soldiers die from lack of drones. Activities like this should have a turnaround time of 12 hours maximum. I mean, yeah, it sounds ridiculous if that is actually the case. A new policy of creating mobile training teams near the front to update units out of battle with the latest lessons learned should be considered. It's wise to use those who have been injured in the war and cannot fight. The end of part one. So in conclusion of part one, it's important to acknowledge that ignoring systematic issues in the Ukrainian military worsens the human cost of the war and risks more lives. So that's the first part. I will go through the second part with you at some later point, but I thought that was well worth sharing with you. Again, I don't want to be overly negative here, but it is useful to consider these things. And I will share, I think, this article with you in more depth from The Economist. Just a few things, and then I'll have to do the rest of my stuff in a later video. This is Putin. I've written an article on how Putin is not well. He's almost certainly got some form of cancer and quite possibly Parkinson's as well. Well, he has got an even more pronounced limp, and I've seen that develop over time. that limp is a limp. So he's not particularly well. Whether that's going to manifest in something, a more serious outcome, I don't know. We shall see. The final thing I'm going to show you, because I'm going to leave those other things, is this. And don't forget that Ukraine is a geographical place, and it's not just a place where humans live. It's a place where animals live. Is the vast variety of ecosystems that have been so badly affected. I mean, the environmental impact of war is terrible. I've done segments on this before, but don't forget that. Anyway, here's a very small element of this. Storks are traveling through Ukraine, returning from distant Africa to their nests. What will the storks find in Ukraine's eastern, southern, and northern regions? Explosions, fires, destroyed houses. Due to Russia's invasion, the stork population may suffer significant losses. And there you go. And that's kind of like quite an evocative picture, really. It tells you quite a bit, I would say. Anyway, I've got a piece from a video yesterday that I still need to share with you, a big Thomas Tyner thread, and I've got other stuff. So I'll try and get that all done. I've got a big backlog. Oh, well, you know me, I like to talk. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. All the ways you can help support the channel in the description below. Buy me a coffee, PayPal are always so amazingly gratefully accepted. But just watching the video and commenting in the super astute ways that you do, as long as you are that constructive commenter, not the other one, the troll, then I really, really am grateful for your presence here. Thank you for coming on this journey with me, and take care, and I will speak to you soon.